Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Ari and Big Mike are proud to present the greatest podcast in the world. No snowflakes allowed, and summer is coming.
This is the podcast that was started by two guys on cigar night. So, Mike, what do we got today?
Before we get started today, I want to remind everybody to make sure that they like and subscribe, as well as comment on our videos. We want to know exactly what y'all are thinking, and let us know how we're doing. So, that being said, let's get started with today's video. So, you said to me you got some videos you want me to look at and see what I think, and talking all about lying, you know, and other things that are going on. So, why don't you explain it out better than I'm doing right now?
NBC did a hit job on Prager University.
Hello there, I'm Chuck Todd, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Press Reports. So how did a writer and a radio talk show host become the creator of a conservative curriculum being adopted by a growing number of states? Talk radio host Dennis Prager came to believe our public schools spend too much time on things like policing language and not enough time on what makes America great.
Prager University is an educational organization that has been permitted in certain states to be a supplement to the education of its students. Its aim is to provide balance against the universally or near universally negative portrayal of America that you get in many, many public schools. It tells the truths that are not generally told in education. And naturally, left-wingers are not happy that Prager University is doing what it's doing.
When we look at the history of mainstream media in the 20th century, and even to this day, it's all propaganda. It's about getting us to believe what the government or whatever organization is in charge or has power wants us to believe, not what's actual truth. When I was in high school, I had a kid, he was a student exchange student from China. He always asked the question to the American students, why do you believe the media? And this was in the early 90s. Fast forward 30 years, I'm still asking the same question. Why do people believe the mainstream media?
It was a half-hour segment, and in that half-hour segment, they managed to cram in every type of lie that Paul Ekman, who is an expert on deception, listed in his book, Telling Lies. It was absolutely amazing how well they were able to fit them all in. So I guess we should start by defining what a lie is. Paul Ekman gives the following definition of a lie: an act in which someone makes a deliberate choice to mislead another person. So you can't lie by accident without giving prior notification of that intention. For example, bluffing in poker is not a lie. Everybody in a poker game expects that bluffing is going to happen. So it's a non-lie. It's what's expected. Or if you go to a magic show, the magician didn't make the rabbit appear out of the hat. It's a non-lie, even though he intended to deceive you. You paid him to do exactly that thing. The two basic ways of lying are called concealment and falsifying. Concealment means withholding some information. Specifically, it means not telling someone a truth that you owe to them. The other type of lie is falsifying. Falsifying is presenting false information as if it were true. Ekman also mentions that concealment is the preferred method of liars. And the reason is you don't have to make anything up. People say that liars need to have good memories because you have to remember which lie was told to which person. Well, if you conceal rather than falsify, you have a big advantage in that you've never said anything untrue. And you can say, falsely, hey, I never lied to you, because you never actually said an untrue thing.
Right. So that would be called a lie of omission, right? Which we do on a regular basis because we're afraid of the consequences.
In this clip here, NBC is lying by omission when they're not telling you the background of the people they are interviewing.
Families like the Reyes in another Tulsa area district say claims that Oklahoma teachers were bringing up controversial topics in class are false. What does trouble them? A string of anonymous bomb threats at their school. Lindsay is a mom of 6. Her daughter Zoe is in the 5th grade.
As it turns out, the people in this interview are very high up in the teachers' unions and are, as such, left-wing activists.
Lindsay is not just a mom of 6. Do you know who Lindsay is?
No.
Lindsay is the past president of the Union Schools Education Federation. And Lindsay's husband is also on the Union School Board.
That is a critical piece of information that a viewer would need to evaluate the credibility of these people. Instead of mentioning it, they just let it pass. That is a lie by concealment. The next type of lie is falsification, which is presenting false information as if it were true. The example that Paul Ekman gives is someone gets laid off at work, comes home and his wife asks, "How was work today?" And she says, "Great, I got a promotion." That would be falsification. NBC does that exact thing when they say that non-white students aren't told that they're victims, when they say that pronouns aren't taught in schools.
Teaching kids about preferred pronouns and other what we call woke issues, then you're really not teaching them.
What I hear from teachers of every background is that they are slammed from block to block. They are underpaid, they are underappreciated, and that they don't even have time to talk about pronouns, gender theory, critical race theory.
I don't believe that they're telling you the truth.
But the truth is, like this.
The gaslighting has to end. I can't tell you how many times leftists have said to me that conservatives are making it up, that critical race theory in schools does not exist, that
Or even preferred pronouns.
Preferred pronouns doesn't exist, that LGBTQ stuff doesn't exist, that teachers are just so focused on teaching, they're doing none of this. So here's a bunch of clips. Watch for yourself.
Pittsburgh Public Schools is now offering what it calls an anti-racist approach, saying it is trying to address racial inequity in math classes. We think of math as, addition, subtraction, multiplication, sort of an objective reality. How can math be racist?
We're talking about really a mindset, and it's an approach. So whether we use the term anti-racist or we talk about racial equity, it's the same.
I have 5 additional examples for you.
Not hard to find.
I mean, it took us
5 minutes.
yeah,
right.
5 minutes. Queer non-binary teacher shows off his classroom.
Let's do a tour of my inclusive classroom. Starting off with the social justice word wall we will be growing throughout the year. We did our identity maps and what is identity. A large collection of books. Oh, a pronoun poster. A shocking pride flag. Yes, because love is a human right and everyone in this classroom matters. More inclusive picture books. Pronoun mascot. Oh my goodness, inclusive poster. Books. I'll be showing you more, but that's my inclusive classroom.
Next, let's see the next. These don't exist.
First of all, as a high school history teacher, critical race theory is not something that I explicitly teach. I don't teach that term, I don't ever use that phrase, but it's something that's basically woven throughout my entire U.S. history class. It really is just the idea of a few things. One, that race is a social construct that still impacts our systems today. 2, that systemic racism is still around and is still a thing, and that there is still white privilege. There are obstacles that white people don't have to face, that people who are not white still have to face.
Okay, this is former DEI leader and dean of instruction. Okay, so supposedly these teachers don't exist, right, Dennis?
Right.
Decolonizing education means we need to radically reimagine what schooling can look like. It means prioritizing equity. It means not accepting the status quo. To decolonize education means to get to the root of how and why we operate the way we do in school. And in what ways does it uphold whiteness? Decolonization in education goes beyond inviting everyone to the table. It pushes past asking for ideas to contribute at the table and gets to the reason why we need a table in the first place, to bring everyone together.
What about an organization like Black Lives Matter? The problem with saying Black Lives Matter is saying that your life doesn't matter and you're standing up for yourself. You're saying that there's a whole group of people out there that are saying your life doesn't matter and you're saying mine does. But you're coming from a place of victimization rather than saying, I'm going to be overcoming that and I'm going to start thriving and be much better than what I should have been.
You're making it sound as if having a Black Lives Matter poster, like they had in that video, in a classroom is actually telling students that they are victims.
I 100% believe that. If I have to tell you that you're not a victim, I'm implying that you are a victim. That's the interesting piece about that. When I say to you, this is what's what, because I'm saying that the other thing is not. That's the problem. The problem is we're teaching our children to be victims, right, rather than to be full-grown adults, to be people who can make their own choices, to be people who can think for themselves. We don't want that. We want everything to be black and white. One of the things that I'm noticing about these videos that we're starting to watch is how everything is black and white from NBC, and Prager is coming from this place of gray. The world is gray. Nobody in this world is perfect.
The next type of lie that Paul Ekman discusses is called misdirection. Misdirection is acknowledging that you're having an emotion or a feeling and misidentifying what's causing it. For example, let's say I ask you where you were all night and you're telling me a lie. And you're all nervous about what you're saying. And I say, Mike, why are you so nervous? And you say, oh, RIG, you know, the reason I'm nervous is because I'm just really concerned you're not going to believe me. That would be misdirection, because the real reason you're nervous is because you're lying and you don't want to be caught. But you are acknowledging the emotion. Yep, I am anxious, but you're not saying why you're having that emotion. Now, what you're going to see in this next video is a little different than that, but it's very, very close. In what you're about to see, the reporter Antonia shows to this teacher a video about the abolition of slavery made by Candace Owens for PragerU. And she's going to identify why she doesn't like the video.
I don't want my students to think and believe that slavery only happened in America and it only happened with these two groups of people, because that does not explain to them what slavery is.
Here's the first thing you need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people.
I will say, from the perspective of a Black American who's a descendant of slaves, it feels like in this video that's called A Short History of Slavery, like she's immediately on the defensive. And we're almost halfway through the video and there's no acknowledgement. She's giving credit mostly to white people right now for ending it, right, before the acknowledgement of the pain that some of your students might actually know about and feel in their families, right?
I believe the reason she doesn't like the video is because PragerU is offering a perspective that she simply hates, this a perspective that she really doesn't like. And instead of saying, hey, listen, this story, what Candace Owens is saying wrecks my narrative, she's saying, oh, I think it's going to hurt people's feelings, in a way that I don't really think she's being very honest.
I mean, I get that. But when we talk about slavery, especially in America, there's a lot we don't talk about. Do we talk about black slave owners? We don't. We don't talk about the truth. We talk about what we want to focus on. We talk about what propaganda are we pushing. And if I want to push a certain propaganda, then I'm going to leave things out. And then I'm going to do misdirection.
The next type of lie is one of my personal favorites, and the reason it's one of my personal favorites is because I used it in my novel Due Process. There's a scene in which a spy confronts her victim, and what she says is, she just tells him, I'm a spy, in a way that he would look really, really foolish for saying, really? You're a spy? It's called telling the truth falsely, and Paul Ekman defines it as telling the truth, but with such exaggeration or humor that the target remains uninformed and misled. And one way you can do telling the truth falsely is by implying that if you believe what is said, you're one of those awful, terrible people who's on the other side and is outside of polite society. One of the ways that the NBC broadcast uses telling the truth falsely, making you too embarrassed to admit that PragerU might be pretty good, is when they use languages like book bans.
But behind the shiny studios and kid-friendly content is a dark view of the direction of our country. For many conservatives, our current culture war is a battle between good and evil, right and left. This idea fuels book bans and bills in dozens of states seeking to restrict how teachers can talk about race, gender, and tough chapters of our history.
Now, what's being banned, which is not really being banned in the sense that somebody in possession of the book is going to be arrested. It's not being banned in the sense that the Hitler Jungen are throwing the books onto a bonfire. It's being banned in the sense that the books that people are objecting to are legitimately pornographic. Libs of TikTok and others have shown the contents of the book, and they cannot be shown at school board meetings because they are legitimately pornographic. And what is being asked, what is being done, is they're being removed from children's libraries, they're being removed from elementary school classrooms, so that children should not be exposed to books that are not age appropriate. But there's an association with the word book bans, right? We mentioned those Hitler youth throwing books onto bonfires. And when you say, he supports book bans, a lot of people, their minds are going to go straight to those book bonfires, and they're going to say, you support PragerU, but he supports book bans. You're not in favor of burning books on bonfires, are you?
Prager brings up 2 points. Point number one, he's like, he went, when he was a kid, public school, public libraries had, a children's section. I grew up the same way, even though I'm 30 years younger than he is. There was a children's section because we're trying to protect our children. We're trying to make sure that they're okay. And the second piece is just about every civilized society in the history of mankind has done the exact same thing. It's not just us. We want the truth, but we also want it in a way that's not going to give them nightmares or traumatize them or turn them into something that they're not. Which whatever that is, we want them to be the best they can be. Like, I want to be the best man that I can be. I want my children to be the best they can be. If I'm teaching them something that teaches them that they're a victim, or that there's something wrong with them, or that they're lacking in some way, then they're never going to achieve the best they can be because they don't believe in themselves, and they're going to believe what they want, what the people in power want them to believe. The whole idea of America is freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. It's the ability to say things that we weren't allowed to say in other countries before we got here. Now we're losing that freedom by teaching our children that they're constantly lacking, that they're not good enough. And if we take that out, and if we teach them how to really become the best person they could be, then the power lies with the individual rather than the authorities.
The next example of telling the truth falsely that NBC does is the use of a very manipulative word. Let's see if you could spot it in this upcoming video.
But behind the shiny studios and kid-friendly content is a dark view of the direction of our country.
Did you spot the word? That word was dark.
Oh, I caught that one. I definitely caught that one. I grew up watching Disney movies, right? I don't know about you, but that's how I grew up. I grew up watching Disney movies. You ever notice the villain comes out and they're dark? It's like you watch the old cowboy spaghetti westerns. The hero, he's wearing white, and then the villain is wearing black.
Well, Darth Vader.
Darth Vader. It's these things, those connotations we say by the word dark. Like, there's something wrong, there's something evil, there's something that we got to stay away from this because it's dark.
Well, Dennis Prager does believe that we're in a battle between light and dark, between good and evil. So It is true that Dennis Prager talks about darkness. When Prager's views are described the way they were described in the video, it almost makes it seem as if he's got a dark vision of America. And when that happens, it makes it so that your imagination runs wild. All of a sudden, you're thinking about all these different dark visions, and people on the left are always dressing up as women from The Handmaid's Tale or whatever, or some other dark vision, maybe jackbooted thugs or goose-stepping down the street, dark vision. And you're free to imagine any awful thing happening. And that's the result of using these words that are kind of true, but it's using the truth falsely. The next type of lie that Ekman lists is called half-concealment, which is admitting only part of the truth, allowing the liar to maintain a lie without ever saying anything untrue. The example that Ekman gives in his website is when asked about his company's performance, the CEO responds, "We're doing great. We made twice as much money this year," while failing to mention that they also spent 4 times as much money and they lost half their staff. They say some true facts and leave out others. Now, this one is something they do a number of times in the video. For example, here is how they discuss the credentials of Dennis Prager and Marissa Streit, the CEO of Prager University.
So how did a writer and a radio talk show host become the creator of a conservative curriculum?
Under the direction of a former educator turned CEO, Marissa Streit.
You're talking about 2 people, both with, master's degrees. You're talking about people who've spent a good portion of their career in education, whereas Prager's talked about teaching in both high school and in college. Marissa Streit was like K through 8 and has a master's. So when I look at the 2 of them, not only did they go to school about education, they have hands-on experience, but they don't bring that up. They bring up she was a tutor when she was 18. They bring up how he's been a radio host for 40 years. He also wrote several books, educational books too. Like he's not someone devoid of a resume to be talking about this topic.
Worthwhile to mention that most of Prager's videos are about 5 minutes long. It won't take that long to fact check them one by one. And if a teacher is using these videos in class, going through them fact by fact by fact is probably an excellent lesson for the students. Let's see if we can confirm or deny what PragerU is saying here. Is it true? Is it not? And if it is true, they've learned something right there. If it's not true, they've learned something right there. Instead, what NBC is doing is, by dwelling on the credentials, which, by the way, are excellent, they are making it seem as if teaching is done with some degree. It's done with an ed school certification or something like that. And it's not. Teaching is done one fact at a time. If you look at the videos selected by the NBC gang, what you'll notice is that they're all the videos about race. And it makes it seem as if PragerU is completely obsessed with race and that they have hundreds of videos, all of them about race, all of them saying that there's no racism in the United States. And that's not true at all. In fact, I think it's something like 5% of the videos by PragerU have anything to do with race. They have things to do with happiness. They have the 10 Commandments. They have things to do about balancing your checkbook. They have things to do with biographies of all the presidents. Very few of them have anything at all to do with race. But by selecting the videos that they selected, they are using half-concealment. Look, these people are obsessed with race, and your kids are going to get terrible education on race if you let a school that uses PragerU videos teach your kids. The next type of lie that Ekman lists on his list is called the incorrect inference dodge. It's just telling the truth, but in a way that implies the opposite of what is said. A friend invites you to dinner. and the casserole he served is absolutely disgusting. And he says, "Hey, Mike, how'd you like the casserole?" And he says, "Wow, I've never eaten anything like that in my life." What you just said there implies you enjoyed what you just ate, when you really did not. This is the type of lie that is used most often in this particular broadcast. I'll give you the most egregious example at the end, but one of the first ones, and the one they use the most, is about bomb threats.
It's not about the kids anymore.
Then the district received 10 days of bomb threats within 1 month. Lindsay is a mom of 6. Her daughter Zoe is in the 5th grade.
It kind of scared me, but then I realized, well, it's just people sitting in front of a computer trying to scare you.
That's not a very normal thing as a child to have your school get not just 1, not just 2, but multiple bomb threats.
They say that PragerU is used in schools, and oh, by the way, there are also bomb threats. What does one have to do with the other? Nothing at all. But it seems almost like they're hoping that their viewers are going to connect one with the other, and they'll think to themselves, people are watching PragerU videos, and they're so angry and so incensed by the right-wing propaganda that they see that they call in bomb threats to the schools. My Lord.
Right, and then as I'm watching the video, I don't feel like I can even question it. Like, I looked at that, as we looked at the video, what did I see? Like, I was like, wait, what? PragerU is causing bomb threats? That was my first thought. And then I was like, is it really? I don't know. But can I really question it? Because they have this little girl sitting there being like, yeah, we've got bomb threats. And then she talks about getting jaded to the bomb threats, too. So I don't know what to think. All of a sudden, I'm seeing like, whoa, that's the problem with when we talk about that incorrect inference dodge. You know, it's the idea of like, I don't really want to tell you the whole truth. I'm just going to tell you what you want to really hear so you can then infer what we want to tell you. So I can make it a more palatable thing.
If they were called in, then NBC is telling the truth. But by associating one with the other, they're almost making you too embarrassed to say you like Prager videos. You like PragerU? Are you kidding me? Bomb threats are called in. You don't like bomb threats, do you? Then how could you like PragerU?
Right, and that's the point of the little girl. By having that little girl, I can't question her. It's like there's something wrong with me if I question this child.
The next to the incorrect inference dodges that NBC uses here. 1930s education.
What would a good American education system look like to you?
Like it did in the 1930s, minus anything that was offensive.
All the bad things going on in the 1930s.
Right. Minus the bad things. Yes, that's correct.
I'm trying to absorb 1930s schools, 1930s curriculum, 1930s. I mean, what does that look like?
I still have some questions about that myself, Chuck. What I really understood about Dennis Prager and his larger project is that, in his words, this is all about emphasizing good and goodness in the world, and that there's this battle between good forces and evil forces, and that students need to learn more about the positive aspects of American and Western history here.
I don't know what view you have of how education was done in the 1930s, but I doubt most people think that the education was particularly good. Maybe they think back to Southern segregated schools. They would think back to the views that really were kind of unsavory. But in addition to those unsavory views, there were also classic, tried and true pedagogic techniques. There were books that were very, very heavy on content, trying to teach the basic facts about American life, trying to teach the basic facts about history, about art, about literature. There were books that taught about character. And what Dennis Prager was trying to say, and they cut him off, was that was what he wanted. You take the good from what they were doing in the 1930s in education, and you keep that. And everything else you throw away. Because it's almost like, in fact, it is an evolutionary process. Traits that don't work go into the dustbin of history. But traits that do work, they better stay, or else you're going to have something that doesn't work.
My grandfather, who was born in the 19-teens, when I was looking at colleges, when I was a teenager, said to me, he says, you know, the education I got by the time I graduated 8th grade was what your mother got, my mother, you know, in the 1950s and 60s, and what I'm getting by the time I graduate college. So it went from 8th grade education to, you know, high school to bachelor's. Now, I see what people are learning with master's degrees. I learned more when I was in high school than what I see some of these people getting.
The last of the lies I want to mention here on this show is probably the most disgusting and egregious one.
The left has made it impossible to say the N-word any longer. That's disgusting. It's a farce. It's the only word that you can't say in the English language. Of course, you should never call anybody the N-word. That's despicable.
If you watch that clip, which is definitely cut out of its context, I'm going to give you the wider context in a second. If you watch the clip, it is an incorrect inference dodge because they're making it seem, by the way they edited it, that Mr. Prager is itching to use the N-word, and he's just so disappointed that virtuous people on the left have spoiled it that he can't use his favorite word in the English language. That's absolutely not the truth. He did say that. He did say that exact thing, but he said it in a larger context. So you are left with a false impression of what he was getting at. And what he was getting at is this. In one of his broadcasts, he talked about how Harry Truman, whom Dennis Prager seems to admire quite a lot, used the term Kiketown to describe New York City. And he had a caller call up and say, how is it that you could say the word kike on the radio, but you can't say the N-word because kike is the equivalent for Jews of the N-word as it is for blacks. And he explained something that was originally said by John McWhorter. John McWhorter is a professor. He has given a number of courses on the great courses. I've listened to all of them, some of them 4 or 5 times. He's fantastic. If you ever want a really good course, go to the great courses, get something made by John McWhorter. Anyway, John McWhorter is a linguist, and he was discussing how ridiculous our attitude is towards the N-word, in that we're treating it like it's a magic word, and that if anyone says it in any context ever, the sky is going to fall or something like that. Now, there are no magic words, and if you want to know exactly what he says, go and read his exact words. But what Dennis Prager is trying to say is that if we want to characterize people's views in history, we have to know what they actually said. If we want to describe what people were like, quoting them is one of the ways to do it. And if they use words that were really, really nasty, knowing what it is that they said gives us a perspective of history that can't be had if you're just going to boulderize it. And that is what Mr. Prager, one of the things that he was getting at. And the implication that Dennis Prager just really wants to say the N-word is such a disgusting lie that it's really hard for me to believe that they had the chutzpah to say it.
I hear Dennis Prager's point. I understand that he doesn't want to be able to use the term. However, if he wants to do any reading from Frederick Douglass, if he wants to read Richard Wright,
Mark Twain.
What?
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. He's not allowed to read that book online because it's use of the N-word. Richard Wright was a black man who grew up in the South, wrote a book called Black Boy, and uses the N-word all throughout it. It's a book that I learned in high school. In my high school, we went through that book. We learned about racial issues. We learned about inequalities. We learned about all this stuff. Now, you can't learn that book anymore because of the N-word.
All that has to be said to get me never to use the N-word is, hey, listen, Ari, that word is really insulting. I appreciate if you would never say it. You know something? I'd say, okay, then I won't. I don't want to hurt your feelings, no matter who you are or what your color is. And Dennis Prager has dedicated his life to battling evil. That's what he has said many times on the show. And the notion that he would use a word that would hurt people's feelings just because, I can't imagine why he'd even want to.
Prager University puts forth this video that says, guess what? You're not telling everything. You're telling what you want me to hear. And if I find out the truth, I'm going to know that you are lying. And if you're lying about this, what else are you lying about? Because once you get caught in a lie, you lost trust. And I don't believe you anymore. And I don't know how I can believe you again because you've broken that trust.
You could make the argument that Dennis Prager and Prager University's account of history is too optimistic, that is too much rah-rah America. You could make that argument. I don't think it's a particularly strong argument, but you could make that argument. The thing is, when studying history, you can't know everything that happened, and you have to emphasize some things and not emphasize others. As a result, whatever history you're going to get is going to be somewhat of a distortion, because you can't know enough to reconstruct events exactly as they happened. And if you're going to have a distortion, you might distort things to make them too optimistic, like they're saying PragerU did, or they make them too pessimistic, like a lot of the public schools, like Howard Zinn, like all these other people do. And if you're going to make one of those errors, which one are you going to make? And I would argue that it's better to err on the side of being too optimistic, because optimists are the people that create. Optimists are the people that build the businesses, that build the rockets. They're the people that build the inventions. They're the people that make the great art. Pessimists are the ones who just sit there and they're resentful and all they can do is destroy. And if you're arguing for too pessimistic a history of the United States, too pessimistic a history of the European civilization, it seems to me that you're more interested in destroying than you are in building students into better citizens, better people, happier and more successful people. And if our schools are not trying to build citizens into that, what do we even have them for?
Listen, folks, I want to thank y'all for watching. This was a pretty heavy, powerful video today. Listen, y'all have the best day, best night, and I don't know what else. You be well.